Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk a bit about Link and where we might see it going next. So Link has been seeing some pretty decent upside in this bounce. We've gone up around about 26-ish% from the lows. So that's not bad, nothing to sneeze at. It's not as good as some crypto assets. It's in line with a bunch of others, but it's better than other ones. So it's kind of, in the middle of the pack more or less. Now, I made a video about Link about a month ago, in fact, back here on December 15th. And in that video, I said that it was more likely than not that Link was probably going to go back down and have to retest the lows in this range. In fact, I put these lines here on this chart all the way back there and just left them. And it turns out that that's exactly what happened. You were coming off of the hype with staking going live. And just at the time, all the data were really pointing in one direction. And that was that downside seemed more plausible than upside, that going back down and having to retest the lows seemed like a more probable outcome than going back up to the highs of this range. Now we've done that, we've gone down, we've tested the lows, and we've managed to hold it as support and then bounce back to the upside here. Now the question is, do we just roll over again like we did here, kind of off of the middle of the range and have to go back down, or, God forbid, even break the bottom and move down further? Or is it possible that we might be able to continue this rally that we're seeing and go back up and retest the highs? Now, I'm not going to make any kind of call like I did back here of really being too definitive, because I think we're really at kind of a critical juncture for Link and frankly for the rest of the crypto market in terms of what happens. I think Link is going to kind of go the direction that the market goes from here. So I think the upside here, the top of this range, is very much plausible, within reach, if certain other conditions are met. So what are those other conditions? Well, first off, we need to see the broader crypto market remain bullish, and particularly you like to see Bitcoin remain bullish. Bitcoin's been very impressive in this rally, just really catapulting to the upside, but you see it's been slowing down in recent days. And so what you'd like to see is for a continuation of this rally to go forward, to think that Link can also go up here. Now that doesn't mean that Bitcoin has to keep going up in a straight line. You could easily see some consolidation, pulling back, but you'd like to see a higher low, preferably, in my opinion, turning this 19K range into support and then being able to continue moving to the upside. So with Link, what that might look like is, stopping this rally at around here, maybe have to come off down a bit below, but then try to set in a higher low relative to here, and then, work our way back up towards the top, maybe something like we saw in this kind of a rally. Not a straight line up, but, kind of moving up, coming down, setting a higher low, moving up, etc. You might kind of see that kind of behavior to get us up to this point. I think that will require Bitcoin to continue to be able to move up, at the very least, maybe up to the top of this range, to really kind of give Link that breathing room, kind of that tailwind to help pull it up as well, just to get back up to this high. And then, if things remain bullish for long enough, possibly we can even break out of there and try to move up above it. But really, for that to happen, not only does Bitcoin need to remain bullish, I actually think we really need to see the stock market remain bullish for that to be possible, because I don't think that Bitcoin is going to remain all that bullish if the stock market gets rejected off of current levels and starts moving back to the downside. So if you look at the S&P 500, which is what I'm showing right here, I think this is going to be important to watch. So this has kind of become a meme at this point, but there's this, diagonal resistance line that a lot of people have been looking at with the S&P 500. And it is kind of remarkable how often, this has been acting as this resistance, double top here, going down, and now we're just testing it again. And in fact, today, as I record this on the 17th of January, we went up and we touched it more or less with this wick, and now we're kind of in an undecided place. The market's more or less trading sideways today, not really picking a direction in one side or the other. It's also important to mention that the 200-day moving average is also right around this price point for the S&P 500. And so, if we get rejected like we did here, and then more or less rejection here and here, if that happens again, that could mean more downsides coming. I would expect this Bitcoin rally to peter out at this point. Then who knows, maybe we can set in a higher low, but, we don't really know what would happen there. I think Link would then more likely bleed down rather than continue going up from there. But if we can decisively break out of this range, break out of this diagonal and then really get ourselves away from that 200-day moving average, that then could put wind in the sails of crypto and Link to move higher. So really what I'm looking at here is I don't think there's anything especially fundamental to Link that's going to determine if we go up or down from here. I think it's really just going to be in the throes of broader markets. So what I'm actually watching the most closely of anything is what happens with the stock market, because again, I think it's a chain of events that I think would happen where a break above here in the stock market could then lead to broader crypto markets rallying, which then, even if Link doesn't rally immediately, would give it the breathing room to, given, a bit more time potentially, start moving to the upside. Now, obviously, none of that's guaranteed to play out that way, but that's the way I think is the most likely chain of events should we see that play out. I think a bullish breakout in the stock market would probably be bullish for crypto and allow these rallies to continue higher. So that's just what I'm seeing in the more short term on these kind of perspectives. Let's talk about some additional data from some of the models that we have here on the channel. So the first thing I want to talk about is actually a model that looks at the fair value of Link, taking explicitly the price of Bitcoin into account. If I'm basically saying that what happens to Bitcoin is probably going to impact what happens to Link, it makes sense to incorporate the price of Bitcoin into a model and just see where it thinks the kind of fair value level for Link might be currently. So that's what we want to look at here. So what I'm showing you here is a fair value model that I came up with for Bitcoin. So this is basically just a regression-based model that takes into as input the Bitcoin price as well as just time as a factor, and then tries to basically identify what the kind of fair value for Link might be at any given point in time. So you can see that it's going to be some volatility, right? You're not just going to be sticking to the fair value exactly. There are going to be times where Link is going to get overextended above fair value, then generally speaking, you tend to kind of come back to it, or where it will be overvalued, and then you kind of correct back down into it. So you can see that in this entire range that Link has been in more recently, we've been kind of hanging out in an undervalued zone from this model's perspective. So this model actually puts the fair value of Link right now based on the Bitcoin price and based on this time factor up at around 11 cents, 11.69 cents. And so we're undervalued from this model's perspective. Now, what's important to note is that, as I mentioned before, this doesn't mean that we just have to immediately go up to $11, to hit that fair value level. You can stay off the fair value for quite a while before ending up going up and revisiting it. But what this model does suggest is that, at least right now, it kind of thinks that Link is more likely to be undervalued based on what it's seeing from the trends that have happened in Link in the past, the time-based trends, and the Bitcoin price right now. It thinks that it's more likely undervalued than overvalued, is basically the way that you can read this. And so that would be, again, where if Link were to continue moving to the upside, maybe then Link can really get a rally and then be able to realize some of that gap, kind of close in that gap, maybe even break out of that range that we were just talking about and get closer to this kind of a value, kind of pull us back up closer to whatever that fair value is. Now, it is important to know that if Bitcoin continues to rally, that fair value is likely to continue going up. That just might give more fuel for a Link to shoot up and maybe actually be able to catch it at some point in the future. So no guarantee that that's going to happen. And of course, if Bitcoin starts falling, this fair value level will fall, and it's possible that Link will continue to remain kind of undervalued from this model's perspective. But just in the sense that this usually kind of acts as a bit of a magnet for the Link price, it's not unreasonable to think that we could continue kind of moving up towards it given enough time, and if there's no catastrophes that happen in the market, within the crypto market itself or broader markets. So not financial advice, just one interesting point of data that I wanted to point out. Now, I also wanted to give some updates about some of our other models that we have here on the channel that I have talked about, in previous videos for Link. So this is the upside downside potential indicator. It's our long-term. This is the long-term version. It's our risk indicator for Link. So basically, green values. This is the Link price chart over time. Green values are low risk. Red values are high risk for the UDPI. And you see that, generally speaking, buying in the green and selling in the red has been an advantageous strategy throughout Link's existence. So if you look at the long-term UDPI raw level, so this is just the actual level of the model across time, with the yellow here being the Link price action across time, see it does a really good job. And so we actually ended up revisiting the very bottom of this model, the -5 level, back all the way down here at the beginning of this range that we started forming kind of at the middle of 2022. And then, we went up kind of into this hype, leading, some of the rumors of staking coming, leading into this, and over here kind of getting up closer to -2. Now we've actually tracked all the way back down. We were just below -4, we're just above -4 now in this move up here. So this means is that, in the long-term horizon, in the kind of the months and multiple months to come, the model thinks there's a lot more realistic upside than downside potential that exists. But, there is downside that exists. We're not where we were down here. Going back down, back down here, maybe even having to set a new low, we can certainly do that to start realizing some of this remaining downside potential that exists here. Certainly from the long-term perspective, the model thinks that upside is more plausible than downside. And so going back to what I just said, barring any catastrophes, stock market crash, Bitcoin collapse, etc., it's not unreasonable to think that this is maybe turning into a long-term accumulation kind of range that we've seen in the past with Link that possibly could be setting the base for another, bigger move to the upside later on. Now, I think we'll have to do different things to get there. I don't think it's necessarily the case that we have to go and break this range to one degree or the other in the near future. It's very reasonable that we could just continue out even further. If the market kind of remains undecided, that seems plausible. I think we kind of have to avoid a recession and a stock market crash to be able to avoid a lower low. But if we can do that, I think Link setting a stage here for a bigger run later on is very much possible. It's very much a plausible hypothesis. The thing I'll have to keep in mind, but if historical trends are any indication of the future, this is looking very much like a reasonable kind of accumulation zone before setting the stage for some more potential upside. Now, I also wanted to talk about the short-term UDPI, which cares about moves that play over days to weeks, so much shorter in its time horizon. And you can see that throughout this entire range, we've kind of just been stuck in a range on the short-term UDPI. The highest we got was just a bit above 0, but more or less we've been trading between around negative 3.5, negative 4, and then to the upside a bit above negative 1 or negative 1 this entire time. So with this kind of running up to about that same level, it does seem plausible that this could act as resistance again, roll us back over if we move back down. And again, if we see the stock market get rejected at current levels, if we see Bitcoin roll over, that's exactly what I expect to happen. I think this would be acting again like we've seen throughout this entire range as resistance, roll over, have to come back down to these levels before maybe being able to find some support and then move back up to the upside. But I think if we see the stock market, break out of that, that descending resistance or decisively above the 200-day moving average, that could actually give fuel for us to break not up back to maybe these levels or even potentially higher, like back above 1 or even above 2, like we saw in some of these rallies back over here earlier on in 2022. So something that's going to be really interesting to watch, and that's again part of why I think right now is a really critical juncture for Link, why I'm not going to make any decisive calls of I think it's going to go up or down in its current point, because the data that I'm seeing right now are really suggesting that we're going to find out the more definitive information is going to come in the next couple of weeks. That right now it's a little bit too early to know, but if we see a more clear rejection from the stock market, that gives us a direction. A more clear breakout of the stock market, that gives us a clear direction. We're just not there quite yet. Again, none of this is financial advice. None of that's guaranteed to happen. Even if we get a bullish breakout of the stock market, Link can do whatever it wants. It could roll over from here. But I think just probabilistically, that's the way I'd be thinking. That probabilistically, a bullish breakout of the stock market would probably mean greater upside for Link. So the final thing I wanted to talk about here was the momentum bias indicator, or MBI. So momentum is the name of the game here. So if you're in the green, that's momentum being biased to the upside, can really pull price up in these explosive movements. Down in the red is bearish. That leads into this kind of bear market behavior, really pulling price down. And so I talked extensively about this in the past, where what we've been seeing throughout 2022 was really telltale bear market behavior of kind of going deep into the red, trying to reestablish positive momentum bias and failing, going back down deeper, trying again, failing, and kind of continuing setting in new lower lows and lower lows and lower lows as you go down. Now, we've been seeing in this kind of accumulation zone that we've been in, or at least this sideways range that we've been in, is this kind of oscillation more or less around neutral. Now, kind of a little bit more biased to the downside than the upside, but generally speaking, trying to kind of reestablish or bouncing around neutral on the MBI, which is not too dissimilar from what it's done in prior accumulation zones. Here we were kind of more or less hanging out around 0, more or less hanging out around 0, and lo and behold, hanging out here around about 0, which is just another data point to say that if no calamities unfold, this again is looking an awful lot like these accumulation zones we've seen in the past, which could then set the stage for a lot of upside to come. And I think that in conjunction with the long-term UDPI is really telling that story. That again, barring no calamities, this is looking like a pretty decent spot for Link to be in. So not financial advice. You should form your own opinion of where you think Link is going to go from here. But I think it's plausible and something we have to keep in mind from a longer term perspective that maybe this is forming a base to be able to set up for a move to the upside. And so in some ways, for the long-term investor, what it does within this range isn't all that important if you think ultimately it's going to be able to go back and revisit its all-time high eventually, or even break out above that. Who knows what time scale that could be in, but that's kind of one of the things to think about. And so ultimately, if you don't think that a recession is going to come, or at the very least you don't think a massive stock market crash is going to come or something like that, then this range here might be about as good as we're going to get. But if you think that that is likely to happen, that we are going to get a recession or we are going to get a stock market crash, then there's nothing guaranteeing that this range will hold, and we certainly could see a lower low. But ultimately, in the long kind of time frame, if you think that ultimately Link will go at the very least revisit its all-time high, getting a discount of where we're at right now, 87% from that, you could do a lot worse, right? It's a heck of a lot buying here than it was buying here, for example, in terms of the expected return if you think you're going to go back up here. And so, if you think that Link is strong fundamentally, which, I personally think it is, just given how big of a moat it has relative to other oracles in the crypto space, Link really kind of is the entire market for oracles. If you think that Web3 is going to continue, you probably think that Link's going to continue going forward. So not financial advice, but that's just kind of what I'm looking at in a more short term, kind of more medium term, and then kind of the biggest picture perspective. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates about our indicators and more over there.